Hey, welcome back to Spellbound. I'm BJ the Book Witch, and this is an episode of Tabled Content. This is where we dive a little bit deeper into books and bookish topics. And today we're talking about revenge as both a psychological concept and a super common and uniquely satisfying story archetype. Revenge is a dish best served cold. From what I could gather, this expression was originally French and from about the 1800s. And the concept behind this statement is that revenge is more intense, more effective, and ultimately more satisfying when one has had time to plot to deliver their vengeance that is calculated, long awaited, and for the receiver of the retribution, somewhat unexpected. Now, that's an interesting perspective to have on revenge, because since the invention of the MRI, I just talk like I've got a permanent fucking head cold. Since the invention of the MRI, brain scientists and psychologists have been able to study the brain and the psychological impacts of revenge, and they've both come to the same conclusion. While revenge absolutely triggers the pleasure sensors in our brain, giving the same specific dopamine releases as rewards, pleasure foods, and drugs, the effects are notably always short-term. In fact, the long-term effects of revenge are consistently found to be significantly more damaging. And countless proverbs throughout history and cultures well before the invention of the MRI scans can confirm this. Even Francis Bacon said that a man that studieth revenge keeps his own wounds green. And there is so much truth in that. Ethics aside, in order to achieve true vengeance, especially on a large scale that takes time, planning, and other people, you have to dwell on the harm that was caused to you. You have to choose every day not to move on. In order to keep the drive, the momentum, the passion to exact revenge, you have to every day relive, revisit, and sit with those feelings, because that is the drive toward vengeance. And that's the mentality behind this Chinese proverb, "He who seeks revenge digs two graves." Vengeance is a commitment. It takes your time, planning, and energy, and sometimes the cost is very great. To keep those wounds alive, you sacrifice your relationships, your ability to heal and move on, and sometimes your sanity. But what is the alternative? Forgiveness, right? And I know you're like, where are we going with this? I'm here to talk about books. And yeah, I know, but this is cool stuff, at least to me, and this is my channel. So, forgiveness. Forgiveness is the other binary to revenge, but not in the way that we think of forgiveness today. See, when we were just talking about revenge, it didn't have anything to do with the original transgression or the original transgressor or the person who wronged us. When we were talking about revenge and the consequences of that revenge, we're talking about the consequences to the person exacting revenge, to the person acting on it. We're talking about consequences to the person taking revenge. And we need to be talking about forgiveness in the same way too. Before Christianity, forgiveness was not about absolution. But because of the church's language on salvation, forgiveness became equated with absolution in all contexts, and that's not entirely correct. Before Christianity, when a person chose not to exact revenge, they weren't saying, "I don't hold you accountable or responsible for the thing that you did." They were saying, "I'm choosing to take a different path and to move forward and heal myself regardless of what you did." And that path does avoid those natural consequences that we were just talking about that have to do with revenge. But in fact, this current view of forgiveness, which focuses on absolving the transgressor, is actually pretty harmful. Psychologists and social scientists can tell you that quite easily. By painting forgiveness as a choice to absolve the wrongdoer instead of a choice to move on and heal in their own way, puts the focus in entirely the wrong spot. And that's prevented real recovery and trauma healing and positive social discourse for victims of all kinds, but especially women, and especially on behalf of the church. See, when the church as an institution in society puts such an aggressive focus on forgiveness as absolution, you remove the accountability from the wrongdoer and put accountability on the victim, which is all kinds of messed up and actually has the exact opposite effect of the original intention of forgiveness itself, which is the choice to self-heal. Psychologists will tell you that forgiveness has absolutely nothing to do with the original transgression or the transgressor. Victims of any kind don't owe their transgressor absolution. That's not theirs to give anyway. Instead, forgiveness is a choice and a journey towards self-healing and removing the power that the original transgression has over their life. Notice the focus here is entirely on the victim. That's the way that it should be. So, we've been wronged. And as individuals, we have two choices. 1, revenge, a proven source for immediate gratification with ultimately damaging long-term effects. Or 2, forgiveness, a choice with more upfront hurt, but with more hopefully positive long-term effects. Now, I say that we have two choices, but we don't so much anymore, do we? In most contemporary societies, we have governments that prevent against revenge. A crime is still a crime, no matter how personally justified we believe it to be. Instead, we have deferred our vengeance to the state or governing body because the state maintains a monopoly on organized concerts of violence. Okay, BEEJ, you lost me. What does that even mean? Okay, I mean, think back in the day cafe to fiefdoms with kingdoms, lords, knights, squires, and all that. A knight was a professional soldier who fought to defend the fiefs and the lords and the landowners, or whoever was nearest to them that had power and money. Well, if money is the only thing keeping this knight loyal and fighting for him and allegiant, what happens when some other dude can offer more? Right. Enter the nation state. Once nations started to become a thing and peoples started identifying themselves based on the nation or country that they belonged to, well, one of the reasons that was groundbreaking and one of the main consequences of this concept of nationalism, of identifying yourself based on your country and not the fief or the kingdom or the lord, well, that gave everyone this overarching sense of identity and allegiance to that nation. And that also meant that the nation itself, and the governing body of that nation, now had full control over the concerts of violence. There was no longer Jerry's army for Jerry's field and Sabrina's army for Sabrina's field. No, there was one army, France's army, the army. So in the same way that the state maintains a hold on all concerts of violence in the name of the state also maintains a hold on all acts of vengeance as well. Think about it. Back in the day, Jerry murders Sabrina. He likes her fief. Back in the day, Sabrina's second in command would go rally the troops and go chop Jerry's head off. Boom, revenge, TCO. But now, 2021, Jerry murders Sabrina. He likes her pool. What happens? Jerry is arrested by state-sanctioned police. Jerry is held in a facility run by the state, and all legal proceedings moving forward are in a court case called the state versus Jerry, not Sabrina versus Jerry. Because in our contemporary society, Jerry hasn't only harmed Sabrina, he's harmed the state. He's committed a crime against the body politic that maintains a hold over all body of violence. And in killing Sabrina, he acted with the sovereignty to end human life, a sovereignty and a right maintained only by the state. An interesting side note, yes, individuals can also press charges against another individual. In these instances, though, the punishment is not corporal. Retribution is and can only ever be capital, or monetary gain. If this were a class, this would be where I would ask you at your tables to discuss whether our current worldview in capitalism has made us more humane or less. In both instances, however, the state now acts as a mediator or go-between, and they exact revenge on our behalf and through legal action render a punishment. Now, in our terms today, we probably wouldn't call that revenge. We'd call that justice. And that's an interesting rabbit hole. Law professor Thane Rosenbaum in a recent NPR podcast said that the state's legal actions against a transgressor is both revenge and justice. And that's an interesting take, I'm not gonna lie. And we don't have time to dive into it here, so I'll link the podcast down below. But it does lead us to this interesting relationship between revenge and justice, and our understanding of justice as something so universal that it can't or shouldn't be achieved on a personal level through personal revenge. Because in those instances, it can get too subjective. And this is where you have the argument, an eye for an eye and the whole world is blind, made famous by Mahatma Gandhi. And by the way, Gandhi here is referring to the biblical passage, and before that, Hammurabi's code, a man who injures his countryman as he has done, so it should be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Just as another person has received injury from him, so it will be given to him. Now, that is, by today's standards, bold, aggressive, and violent. But hey, it's the Bible. The intention of this statement, though, is to ensure that revenge or retribution is no more or no less than the same offense. Even mob bosses understand that. What was it that the Godfather said? I don't know, I only watched it once, but I think there was a scene where the Godfather couldn't kill this other guy's daughter's would-be rapist because his daughter was still alive. The revenge didn't fit the original crime. There are rules. There is justice. And in fact, this sentiment permeates throughout history before the nation state had a monopoly on our vengeance. Now, we believe that as a culture and society, that without the intervention of law and order, that revenge killings would simply perpetuate ad infinitum. But actually, those blood feuds, the Hatfields and McCoys, those were pretty much in the minority across cultures and throughout history. Even before nationalism, there was a cultural understanding of justice as both individualized and universal. They weren't seen as separate, and this concept of exacting revenge was part of the culture. It was very much an individual's job to exact revenge, to mete out punishment for a wrong for the sake of the whole. It was accepted, monitored, and sacred. In fact, some cultures weave revenge into their deeply held spiritual or religious beliefs. Now, some religions and spiritual practices are closed loop, and only those who belong to that culture or that identity may practice them. So I can't speak with any authority to any practice or belief system to which I'm not a part or haven't had the privilege or permission to study. But what I can say is that there are cultures who have been systemically oppressed on a global scale, resulting in all kinds of generational trauma. And this concept of cultural revenge, or being an active agent to mete out justice on this plane without deferring it to the state via the government or the divine via the church, is empowering. It's inherently empowering. And this is a concept that's been woven into some cultures and practices over centuries as a way to process that generational trauma and reclaim self-sovereignty. Oh my God, BEEJ, I get it. You're obsessed with revenge, but I'm here for the books. Yes, I hear you, and I do love revenge. I'm fascinated by the role that it plays, or actually doesn't play, in our day-to-day life, and yet we are still so fascinated by it. As we have evolved as humans, we've placed a larger ethical weight on the concept of forgiveness, and we've deferred the concept of revenge to the two largest powers that we can recognize, the state and the church. We consider the state responsible for delivering a judgment, literally, and sentencing a transgressor to punishment, and we consider the church, or the divine, responsible for delivering a spiritual judgment and sentencing them to the ultimate punishment or reward. So where does that leave us? Humans who have a chemical reaction to the immediate feeling of revenge, of justice being restored. I don't know, but I also know that I'm not the only person asking that question. I'm not the only person obsessed with revenge, because revenge is one of the, 7 main story archetypes? Everybody's into revenge. And we understand that when we hear or read a story, parts of our brain respond as if we are experiencing the story ourselves. And that's not new. Even if you don't understand the science behind it, you fundamentally understand that, because you're readers. So then you also know that you're experiencing the same dopamine rush from reading about revenge as if you were experiencing it, which makes revenge a delicious and satisfying type of story to read. So with that, I've put together a list of revenge reads. They cross all genres, and I'm rating them on an admittedly, absolutely arbitrary scale of inconsistent preferences and idiosyncrasies that I'm calling BJ's Revenge Rating. BJ's Revenge Rating has 5 categories. 1. Commitment to cause. I want my protagonists completely consumed in their desire for revenge. No time for subplots. If they have time to get swept away in some ridiculous romance, then they aren't completely committed to avenging their dead brother, then are they? 2. Calculation, planning, and list making. I want a hit list. I want a burn book. I want one of those dimly lit corkboards with people's faces pinned to it that get a red slash through them. I want to see that the protagonist has stewed on this, and I want to see the effort, and I want everything to click into place exactly the way that it was planned. Number 3, romance. I already mentioned this in number 1, but I'll say it again here. The romance, because there's always going to be a romance, has got to come second. But more specifically, the major conflict in that romance has got to be the protagonist's commitment to their cause. It has to drive a wedge between them. Because again, if they're 100% committed to their revenge, then they're not going to be wasting emotional energy taking Becky to the drive-in. 4. Active agent versus poetic justice. Poetic justice is any outcome where right is rewarded and wrong is punished, but usually in a specific manner that relates ironically to the original wrong. An example of this would be in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, when Elsa, this Nazi woman that Indy was banging, she becomes obsessed with the Holy Grail and she betrays Indy. And at one point, she's dangling off a cliff, and Indy's trying to pull her up. And out of the corner of her eye, she sees the Holy Grail. And in her obsession with greed, she reaches instead for the Grail, slipping out of Indy's grasp and plummeting to her death. Indiana Jones did not kill Elsa, despite her betrayal. It was her own greed that did her in. 5 out of 5 for poetic justice. Now, sometimes poetic justice can be orchestrated, even by the Avenger. And this usually implies that the protagonist wants to stick to some sort of moral code, even in meting out justice. And they usually allow the transgressors to hang themselves with their own rope. Now, this type of poetic justice is in direct opposition to an Avenger that would act as an active agent during each step or phase of their revenge, usually resulting in condemning the character. The presence of poetic justice usually keeps all characters more on the morally gray side of things, and even sometimes on the right side of things, which really only matters if you're passionate about the presence of ethics in your revenge literature, which I am not. 5. Forgiveness versus ultimate consequences. If a protagonist is able to say when, and able to recognize not only when enough is enough, but when justice has truly been served, and when they're able to recognize and identify the moment when they're no longer bound to the original transgression and they can finally move on and heal and be happy, that would be a 0. Which isn't a bad thing. It just means that they didn't succumb to the whole dig two graves thing. But sometimes the protagonist receiving the ultimate consequences for their choices of revenge can be completely satisfying. Think like V for Vendetta. And then like that would be a 5. So that's my rubric. Let's rate some revenge books. Also, this will absolutely contain spoilers. You Must Not Miss by Katrina Leno. This magical realism novel follows the girl named Magpie who walks in on her father having an affair with her aunt, which sends her mother into an alcoholic spiral, leaving Magpie feeling neglected. So she attends a party where she is sexually assaulted, which offends her best friend who bullies her throughout the rest of the book. Essentially, Magpie's trauma from all of that manifests into a magical world called Near. Near is an exact replica of Magpie's town with exact replica people, including a replica magpie. One by one, Magpie lures her transgressors into Near, where the replica magpie literally eats and devours them. Her jaws unhinge, and she just kind of chomp. So let's rate this on my, radically inconsistent revenge scale. 1. Commitment to cause. Well, the revenge in question is delivered through what can only be described as a manifestation of her subconscious, and the book does chronicle Magpie's descent into madness. So in this way, I would consider the commitment to cause as very high. Magpie just keeps on being traumatized and leaning into those feelings, which causes her madness, which causes her revenge. 5 out of 5. None. She has no control over what's happening here. It's just inevitable. 3. Romance. There is a person of interest, but it never develops into a full subplot. And that story for them never moves forward because Magpie is 100% committed to her cause. So 2.5 out of 5. 4. Active agent versus poetic justice. Magpie is absolutely an active agent in her own revenge, even if she can't control it. It's still her own subconscious. There is no divine intervention on Magpie's behalf that could be considered poetic justice. She literally eats her own transgressors in her own head world. 0 out of 5 for poetic justice. 5. Forgiveness versus ultimate consequences. Forgiveness unachieved. Magpie ends the book completely insane, locks herself in Near, builds a boat, and sails away on the waters of her own subconscious. She is completely consumed. 5 out of 5 for ultimate consequences. That gives You Must Not Miss a revenge rating of 12.5 out of 25. I don't know if that's good or bad. This entire scale is nonsense. Next is The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. And this is kind of your blueprint for the classic epic revenge tale. It's also about 6 times longer than it needs to be, and the audiobook is about 1,000,000 hours of my life that I'll never get back. Still love it though. So in this book, this popular chap, Edmond Dantes, has it all going for him. He's popular and well-loved by friends and peers. He's in line for a big promotion. His dad is proud of him. He's engaged to be married to this beautiful girl named Mercedes. And then some jealous dude just sweeps in and frames him for treason or something. Anyway, he spends a ton of years in prison getting all jaded and intelligent. Then he escapes prison and boom, time jump. Suddenly we're in the future, and this extremely mysterious, extremely successful guy named the Count of Monte Cristo is on the scene, who through careful orchestration exacts revenge on each of his wrongdoers one by one. 1. Commitment to cause. 100%. Even though he does get with a new chick by the end of the book, he doesn't take time away from revenge plotting to romance her. 5 out of 5. 2. Calculation, planning, and list making. This dude spent like 23 years in prison working on this, so I'd say yeah, that's a 5 out of 5. 3. Romance. He ends up with this girl named Haiti at the end, but she wasn't his first love and she's kind of just like a happy ending afterthought, so 3 out of 5. 4. Active agent versus poetic justice. I'd say this one's kind of down the middle. A few of his revenge schemes did involve him lying, manipulating, and impersonating, but some of them were just well-timed and carefully crafted moments of truth being brought to the surface. So 3 out of 5 for poetic justice. 5. Forgiveness versus ultimate consequences. Dumas, unfortunately, gives Dante's a happy ending, so that would be 0 out of 5 for ultimate consequences. So, the Count of Monte Cristo gets a 16 out of 25 for Revengivity. Revengeness. The Wicked Deep by Shea Earnshaw. In this YA fantasy, 3 sisters who were drowned as witches centuries ago return to this small town every summer. They inhabit the bodies of local teenage girls, and they each lure a teen boy to his death before returning to the deep. This year, a new boy shows up in town, having no idea of the danger he's in. Penny, our protagonist, befriends him and discovers that actually he's here on purpose, to take revenge on the women who drowned his brother the year before. Now, interesting plot here, we've got a double revenge story happening. Because, and here's the biggest spoiler, seriously, it's like the main plot twist of the book. Our protagonist, Penny, is actually Hazel, the youngest of the 3 witch sisters. Penny is possessed by Hazel from the midpoint of the book to the end, and it is Hazel who befriends the new guy, Beau, Hazel who starts to fall for him, and Hazel who starts to reconsider her ongoing revenge. So, rating. 1. Commitment to cause. So, does she go through with it? Does she kill Beau? No. So, 1 out of 5. Now, she has been doing this for centuries, so we'll give her some credit, but she gives up. 2. Calculation, planning, and list making. This one's interesting. There's definitely some planning and calculation. This has been going on for centuries. But it's the same every year. 3 guys, they drown. There's no mystery. No spice. 2 out of 5. 3. Romance. There is a romance subplot for both characters on both sides of their revenge, and in fact the revenge itself is the major catalyst to this revenge subplot on both sides. So I'm going to give that a 10 out of 5. My rating, my rules. 4. Active agents versus poetic justice. I mean, yeah, the victims are drowned every year, just like the sisters were drowned, but they are drowned specifically by the sisters. So 0 out of 5, active agents all the way. 5. Forgiveness versus ultimate consequences. Ultimately, she does not go through with the murder of Beau, and instead she chooses to move on and die. So her end was met because of her choice of forgiveness, not because of her choice of revenge. 0 out of 5. The Wicked Deep, 13 out of 25. The Ex Hex by Erin Sterling. I buddy read this one with a friend of mine last month, and it was pretty cheesy but pretty cute too. In this contemporary romance, a young woman who is a witch is dating this guy, and after a summer romance, he tells her that he's betrothed. So in a fit of rage and heartbreak, she places a hex on him, which doesn't actually affect him until he returns to town about a decade or so later. So this should be interesting. 1. Commitment to cause. Low commitment. I mean, the revenge happened in the first chapter of the book, and in all honesty, this is not a revenge plot. I just thought it would be fun to include in this list. 1 out of 5. 2. Calculation, planning, and list making. Absolutely none whatsoever. She curses him from the bathtub while she is wine drunk and crying. 0 out of 5. 3. Romance. This second chance romance does eventually take over as the sole focus of the plot. Duh. But the revenge itself is, in a way, the main catalyst for the romance. So 3 out of 5. 4. Active agent versus poetic justice. She was definitely an active agent in this revenge, even if she was drunk. 0 out of 5 for poetic justice. 5. Forgiveness versus ultimate consequences. Of course there was forgiveness. On both sides. It's a rom-com. 0 out of 5 for ultimate consequences. That gives the Ex Hex a revenge rating of 4 out of 25. Bad Bad Bluebloods by C.M. Stunich. This is a contemporary reverse harem romance novel that I've mentioned before in a previous episode. The series itself, The Bad Boys of Burberry Prep, is kind of so-so, but I did like this book specifically, it's book 2 out of 4, because it's about revenge. In the first book, this girl attends a fancy rich prep school on scholarship, and so then she's bullied because she's poor. It's exhausting, quite honestly, and most of her torment comes from the all-boys student council made up of 5 beefcake teenagers. But this second book is about her revenge. She shows back up at school the next year with a new look, a hit list, and some perfectly orchestrated revenge schemes for each bully. And she manages to make each one of them fall in love with her by the end of the book. So, rating. 1. Commitment to cause. She does have some pretty good focus, but her entire existence is not wrapped up in this revenge plan. She does still want to get good grades and keep her scholarship and maintain friendships with the people at school who weren't horrible to her and just generally have a life. So I'd say 3 out of 5. 2. Calculation, planning, and list making. All of it. She has a hit list. 5 out of 5. 3. Romance. The romance does take up a significant portion of the book, and the major conflict of the romance is not the revenge itself, so 2 out of 5. 4. Active agent versus poetic justice. For the series overall, this one is pretty muddy. However, in this book in particular, she is able to keep her hands mostly clean, so I would say 4 out of 5 for poetic justice. Forgiveness versus ultimate consequences. Definitely forgiveness. She ends up in a harem with the beefcakes. 0 out of 5. That gives Bad Bad Bluebloods a revenge rating of 14.5 out of 25. Additionally, I'm looking at the Havoc Series, also by Stunich. Again, this is a romance, however, all 5 books in this series are dedicated to the protagonist's revenge plot, so I was hella invested. But also, this entire series is way more graphic and violent than any of the others that I've mentioned, so content warnings ahead. So, some backstory on our protagonist, Bernadette. She grew up in an abusive home. She was briefly placed in foster care where she encountered pedophiles. She tried to ask for help from her school principal and counselors who tried to exploit her online. And then her sister, who was routinely raped by her stepdad, was murdered. So, our girl Bernadette gets a hold of the school's most aggressive and violent gang of, you guessed it, 5 teenage beefcakes to help her exact her revenge. 1. Commitment to cause. 100%. Ever since the death of her sister, Bernadette's entire existence is dedicated to her revenge. 5 out of 5. 2. Calculation, planning, and list making. Her hit list is dense, and she uses her late sister's favorite pink lipstick to mark off each name. 5 out of 5. 3. Romance. There is a lot of romance across these 5 books. However, after rereading them, I would say that the romance itself, it plays an equal part to the revenge plot. However, the revenge itself is not the major conflict for each of the romance plots. So 3 out of 5. 4. Active agent versus poetic justice. This one's tricky. She and the rest of the gang do specifically murder a lot of people, and that's definitely active. However, most of the main kills are orchestrated with some poetic justice flair. So 4 out of 5. Forgiveness versus ultimate consequences. She does ultimately find her happy ending, and she is able to move on, but only after her hit list is complete. So 1 out of 5. That gives the Havoc series a revenge rating of 18 out of 25. And finally, one of my favorite books of all time, no kidding, Getting Revenge on Lauren Wood by Eileen Cook. This is one of my favorite contemporary YA books, probably because it has a revenge plot. This story is about Helen, whose best friend betrays her right at the end of 8th grade and makes her life hell. Helen moves away, but she's never able to move on. For her senior year, she's given the opportunity to return, and she does so under a different name and with one goal in mind: to destroy Lauren Wood, who is now head cheerleader, star of the musical, Queen Bee prom queen of the school. Very Count of Monte Cristo. 1. Commitment to cause. She changes her name, she changes her look, and she focuses solely on her revenge. 5 out of 5. 2. Calculation, planning, and list making. Her hit list is the first page of her notebook, and over the summer, she hires a fitness coach to help her stay competitive against Lauren for the head cheerleader spot. Commitment. 5 out of 5. 3. Romance. There is a romance, but it does not become the sole focus of the book, and the revenge itself is absolutely the main conflict in that romance subplot. 5 out of 5. 4. Active agent versus poetic justice. This is just a well-orchestrated revenge scheme. Helen targets every facet of Lauren's life and systematically obliterates it using her own actions against her. Orchestrated, but still poetic justice. 5 out of 5. 5. Forgiveness versus ultimate consequences. Okay, let's play with semantics here. Yes, Helen does eventually get her happy ending, find forgiveness, true forgiveness, not absolution for Lauren, and is able to move on. And when she does, she starts going by Helen again. Because when she starts senior year, she starts under the name as Claire Dantes. Subtle, I know. But when she recognizes that enough is enough and her revenge has in fact been exacted, she stops going by Claire. Thereby Claire dies and she resumes life as Helen. So in terms of the story, I think that should count. 5 out of 5. Thereby getting revenge on Lauren Wood a perfect revenge rating of 25 out of 25. Okay, I'm dying to know what you guys think. What are your thoughts on revenge? And what are your thoughts on reading about revenge and stories? What do you think about my ridiculous revenge rating scale? I gotta know. Leave me a comment. And if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. And if you loved it, hit subscribe. And of course, there is always Instagram. But thanks so much for sticking around. Take care, and as always, happy reading!